Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this session of LitFestX. We're joined by Ashok Banker, who's an internationally acclaimed best-selling author and screenwriter. He has to his credit over 43 books, which have sold over 2.6 million copies and counting. And they have been translated in over 18 languages and have been sold in about 58 countries across the world. Ashok, congratulations on the enormity of your success and welcome to LitFestX.
Hi, Kumar, and thank you for having me here. And hello to everyone who is watching. And hope many of you, more of you, join in soon. Please tell everyone about this because I think it's a fantastic idea. I think what Kumar is doing here, he and his team, are the equivalent, the 21st century equivalent of the literary festival, except that it belongs to everybody everywhere, and that's something that's amazing. So I'm very happy to support it, Kumar. And as you yourself just reeled off those few figures about my work and everything. So as you know, I have a kind of readership which is all over the place. So it's nice if I can also be a little all over the place, thanks to you.
Right. So, Ashok, you have been very, very closely associated with mythological writing, amongst other things. And,
Right.
Not just books, but, you're contributing to movies, television shows, so on and so forth. And, in the last few years, we've really seen this huge interest which has surged on mythology. And, it's very apt that we are in discussion with you on a topic saying epic explosion. And clearly it is an explosion about epics and of epic proportions. So give us your sense across the continuum, for television, cinema, books, other content related to, mythology and, some of the epics that India is so proud of.
Sure, definitely. First of all, I have to say that yes, the word explosion is apt, as is the word epic. But I think what we're really seeing is just the first fuse, the sparking of the first fuse that will eventually lead up to a real explosion. I don't think we've even seen the beginning of this phenomenon. And the reason I'm saying that is not because, I consider my work to be directly responsible. If it is in some small way, I'm very happy to have contributed. But I think it's a larger phenomenon that's taking place around the world. And this has been happening for quite a while. You see, if you look at world literature, the resurgence of interest in ancient stories, ancient tales, ancient mythologies is something that has been happening for the last 30, 40, maybe 50, actually even longer, probably in the last 100 years. If one goes back to the last decades of the 19th century, you find a lot of great fantasy authors in the West and even a lot of attempts in India. Let's not forget that the first major English translation of the Mahabharata happened in Bengal by Ganguly, basically, who translated this great epic of Vyasa for the first time in English. Now, so there was a lot of key events that were happening. Tolkien writing in London, in England, and the Inklings all over England. There were other writers in America, in Europe, in China, all of the world. There have been writers and not filmmakers, but even dramatists who've been working in the epic mode and trying to find a way to retell these great stories and revive them for modern readers, modern culture. Find a new way of representing them. And I think that has finally started to take off thanks to media like television and film in particular, which have given these stories a platform that has made them larger than life, that have made them much more exciting, made them more contemporary, more 21st century. The obvious examples, Game of Thrones, of course. Lord of the Rings has now become old. I think now we already need a new template to measure the genre by. Perhaps Game of Thrones is it, perhaps not. I think there's still a long way to go, even for the West, because we've only now found the language. When I say language, I mean cinematically, I mean using the medium of television, using the internet with MMORPGs. It's everywhere, Kumar, as I think we're all seeing for the last, anyone who's had an interest in this whether it was Star Wars in its own way, taking elements of the Upanishads, the blue force of Brahman, which actually becomes the underpinning of the entire Star Wars mythology, or even the concept, for example, of a master and a Padwan. What else is that if not a Rishi and his Shishya, basically? And there are so many elements. George Lucas has acknowledged these things, by the way. I'm not trying to pin anything on anyone. I'm trying to say that we all share this earth. We all share these mythologies. These are very convenient, recent designations of nation and borders and peoples and cultures and communities. The fact is that we are all living beings, all sharing the same air, the same earth, the same water. And we've also shared the same experiences in ancient times. And I think what is happening today is thanks to communication, like this, like the internet, which is bringing us together from different places and different backgrounds. I think what is happening is that we are finding a way to reconnect with each other and using this ancient shared base of stories to find a more meaningful connection. As against, the everyday updates of Facebook and Twitter. These are the oldest human updates, if you could say. Vyasa is saying, yo, dudes, this is what happened and this is what I saw. I mean, maybe not in that way. And I'm not trying to be flip about it. But what I'm saying is that in that age, in that era, it was an attempt to reach out and connect. What else was it? And obviously, I mean, today we have the more commercialized ways of doing it. But essentially, the attempt is the same. As I think a great writer once said, only connect. E.M. Foster, I think it was. He said, only connect. And those two words sum up all art, all literature, all communication, in fact. What else are we all trying to do? Connect. And that's what mythology does. It gives us the common shared base of all interhuman connection across cultures, geographies, geopolitical divides, politics, religion, caste, whatever differences separate us. Mythology reunites us once again. That's what's great about it.
Very interestingly, you mentioned that how it's not just an Indian phenomena, but even globally, you're seeing this, upsurge in the people taking to, mythological content. However, in different forms. So you've got, online games, etc. Now, in your experience, when you're developing the narrative for the modern day viewer or for the modern day reader, are you finding yourself having to make significant alterations in terms of the portrayal, or are you still able to keep things pretty much the way they were?
Interesting, and it's a very good question because it also begs the question of how much should a writer interfere with the greatness of these legacies that we have, because they are great legacies, they're great traditions. And I have a phrase which I use in every introduction to every one of my works. I use it as often as possible to remind people that I am not at all worthy of the work that I do. I do not qualify in any way. There is no certificate, no degree, no diploma that can give me, or any writer for that matter, the qualification to say that, yes, I can retell the Ramayana, I can retell Mahabharata. Not at all. On the contrary, I think we are pygmies. We are little midgets who walk in these giant footsteps left behind by these giant minds that lived, I don't know how many thousands of years ago. They left us this great, great legacy, which transcends everything, transcends religion, transcends culture, transcends literature. I mean, look at the Mahabharata, look at the Ramayana. So I can't even begin to touch the hem of the garment of those great minds that they wore. I can't even begin to say that, yes, let me take this now and redo it for modern readers. That's not something I think I'm qualified to do. What I try to do is, I think, what every grandmother does in the night to a grandchild or several grandchildren in the same bed, saying that, once there was a great king and his name was Dashrath, and he had 4 sons, and one of them was a son called Ram. The way a grandmother retells these stories, maybe a grandmother is one example, maybe a friend sitting around a fireplace in some, place in the dark forest, and saying, I heard this story. And this is actually the way these stories originated. Narada came to Valmiki's ashram and said, do you know this story? Do you know about this great man? Let me tell you his story. And that's how the Ramayana was sparked in Valmiki's mind. And he then went on to invent a meter called the Shlok, which incidentally was inspired by the cry of the crane bird, the concher bird. The concher bird has a very sad, mournful sound, a sad sound. And the word for sad in Sanskrit was Shok. So from Shok, he created a meter that conveyed the sadness of the concher bird's cry and called it Shlok. And that's how the Sanskrit art of epic poetry was formed. It came out of the sound of nature. So he emulated the sound of nature in the meter of Sanskrit, in a certain meter which he called Shlok. And that is how it originated. So everything comes from somewhere else. The Shlok came from the bird. The story came from Narada. Valmiki himself said, I am retelling this tale. So if Valmiki himself could not claim to have created it, and how could he? After all, he only wrote it down. He didn't. If he invented it, then we'd be saying that was fiction. And that is another discussion altogether, which I'm not qualified to get into again. So we have to accept that these stories happened, the incidents happened. These were people at that time who wrote these stories in that language, in that meter, in that shlok, for example, in the case of Valmiki, in a different meter in the case of Vyasa, who formed his own kind of variation on the Sanskrit meter. And then they wrote it for people of that age. I don't live in that age. I don't speak Sanskrit. I don't know if you do, but I don't think most people do. I don't know how to communicate it in that meter. So all I can do is talk in my own hodgepodge kind of way, with my personality, with my style of telling. I'm not Narada. I'm not Valmiki. I'm not Vyas. I'm not Vaisampayana. I'm not Sati. I'm not any of those great retellers of these great tales. All I am is Ashok in this era with my crazy background and upbringing. And all I can do is find my own way to tell the story, except that I don't even know who I'm telling it to, Kumar. It's a very good question you asked, but when I started writing these stories about 20 years ago, probably more than that in shorter forms, but in this long epic form I started writing about 20 years ago, I had no idea if anyone would even read these stories. I also do one thing, that I have to be very honest and true to the stories themselves, to the personages described in the stories. So, for example, I may take liberties with the language, because after all, the moment someone even translates even Sanskrit into Pali or into Prakrit or into Hindi, Devanagari, you are already transmuting the language, the phrases. So I don't think I'm doing anything wrong by contemporizing the phrasing. If I refer to Ram's abs, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. He did have abdominal muscles. And if I choose to call them abs, that's because the word is used today. This is on the first page of my Ramayana series. But I don't then say that Ram was a guy who works out at Gold's Gym. And see, that's where I personally draw the line. I don't feel I have the right to tamper with the core characters and the core events of these epics. I feel I must pass them on essentially as they are. What I feel justified in doing is changing the narrative style to suit today's time, to suit myself basically, because I'm using a voice. I can't talk in your voice, you can't talk in mine. So it's the same thing with language. We can only say it in the way that comes naturally. And I try to do it in a way that is both respectful, because let's not forget that a lot of these characters, I use the word characters loosely, but actually they're people. A lot of these people are actually divine personages. They are divinities to many, many devouts all over the world, especially in India. So one has to respect that. One has to accept that the lore, the mythology, the stories that we have handed down through generations have some essence of spiritual truth and greatness within them. I don't tamper with that. All I try to do is change the local accent to now and here. That's it.
Ashok, very interestingly, you mentioned that you are consciously ensuring that you don't change the sort of tonality, you
Right.
know, and you're only simply paraphrasing it differently so that it's better understood to people, in terms of
Uh,
the day and age.
okay, let me just add a little bit there. Perhaps I didn't. I should add over there. Yes, what I do is also a little more than that. Is I do paraphrase it, but I don't just paraphrase it. For example, if I told that Ram used an arrow, and that arrow split into 1,000 arrows. Now, we've seen the old television serials where we could see the arrows against a blue sky, and then it went on. The arrow took about 10 minutes, and by the time it reached, there was a commercial break. So that was in the 80s era, they made a television series. Today, if you look at a Game of Thrones and they show a similar effect, it'll be done very differently. So what I do is I try to use, how shall I put it? How I try to find a way to describe even the action, even the magical things that happen, even the supernatural elements of the story in a way that is very imaginative. There are a lot of reviews where I've read phrases like 3D effects and visual effects and surround sound about my work. And it's very flattering to hear that. At least I suppose that's a compliment. But in a way, that is what I'm trying to do. Is I'm trying to give you the experience of what it must have been like to be on that battlefield or in that forest or in that fight. So I'm also going beyond the paraphrasing to enhance the elements of the story which are already there. But I will not make Ram a warrior if he isn't already one. So he has to be a warrior, but then I have to show you how great a warrior he was. So I will resort to a certain imaginative addition over there, where I will use my whatever skills I have as a writer in order to make it exciting and thrilling and show it to you in a way that you've never seen before. So if I had to summarize it, it's the same story, the same people that you're familiar with, but you have never read it told like this before.
Right.
That's what I set out to do.
Right. Of late we've seen a lot of shows on TV in India, at least, where a lot of these epics and let's say mythological stories have been retold. And like you mentioned, in the 80s we had a certain way of portraying it. Whether it was the arrows or whether it was the sound or even the language.
Right.
Today, when you see on television, there's a lot of that language which I the generation which would have seen Ramanand Sagar's version or B.R. Chopra's version, and when they see it on television today, after 15, 20, 25 years, there's clearly a huge difference, not just in terms of production values or the graphics or the whiz bang and everything, but in terms of the language and the script.
Right.
Do you find that is doing justice to these epics? Because clearly a lot of that language and scripting, I can imagine it is meant for people who otherwise would not be able to understand a slightly more heavier tone of Hindi or heavier usage of Hindi or some amount of Sanskrit words. But very recently, I mean, I don't remember which one of these shows I saw. I think it was on one of the big television channels where instead of Balak or Vats, the person kept calling saying Bache. Now I just can't imagine that in a Ramayana or a Mahabharata somebody calling the other Bache.
Right. I have to say, I can't watch those shows. I don't think we have even begun to scratch the surface of storytelling and television in India. I know and I do respect the fact that we've probably come a long way since the 50s or 80s or 70s. No, sorry, not the 50s, obviously, but the 70s and 80s. But I sort of agree with you there, Kumar, that I can't stand those shows. I can't stand any of the mythos on television. I think they're awful, they're terrible. Let me say in no uncertain words. And a lot of it does have to do with the scripting. And the unfortunate thing, the reason why this happens is because the people who are writing these shows, who are directing them, who are acting in them, they have zero interest in the original mythological works. I mean, I read the Ramayana and Mahabharata every day. How well I achieve, my retelling is for others to judge. But at least I respect the original work enough to study it every day of my life. I don't think some of these people have any clue what the Mahabharata looks like. And it's a very convenient excuse that a lot of people, I've heard this, by the way, very often, which is why I'm saying it. Like, hear this, no, it's bad luck to keep the Mahabharata. I feel like telling them, is it bad luck or is it just bad intelligence? Because, I mean, come on, forget superstition. If you can do something and put it on the screen for millions of people to watch, respect the original work. And you're right. I see. Let's not get into a question of whether Bacche is right or Balak is right, because there are a lot of books that are doing the same thing. They're trying to bring hip lingo into it and all. I won't deny I've done it, but there's a context in which I may have done it. I don't do it across the board. Okay, like for example, I may try to find a short form for Lakshman once, but that doesn't mean that I make him that thing. It's one instance in which I may show that Ram and Lakshman are being flippant with each other. And brothers have a right to kid around also. But what these people are doing is, it's not that one scene which is a humorous scene. The whole tone of the show, the whole tone of the kind of storytelling that is being done itself is flippant. It's the storyteller who is being flippant, who's being disrespectful. And I think it takes away the beauty and the grandeur of these epics. One thing that a Game of Thrones or a lot of American shows, even British and European shows and all get right, is they keep that tone. If you're watching a Dickens adaptation, you feel as though you're in the Dickensian era. It doesn't even matter whether they're saying thou and thee. That's not the point. They may be saying you and he or whatever, but the tone is right. The look is right. There's a certain amount of gravitas that is invested in the writing, in the direction, in the cinematography, in every aspect, every detail. Over here, it's a joke, actually. And
Right.
I'll be very honest. I have a show which is on air. I'm not even going to name it, because all I can say is that, yes, they adapted my story and that inspired the show. And then I look at the show and I say, I don't want to watch that, which is why I'm not even going to name it. But, on the plus side, Kumar, I think there are a lot of directors. One example is Rajamouli, whom I've had the pleasure of meeting several times recently. He's a reader of my work, which doesn't disqualify him as being a good director, by the way. Just kidding. I hope to be working with him. I can't talk anything about the project, but I hope to be able to announce something with him very shortly. It's unofficial as of yet. It's official between us, unofficial for the world. That's the way he wants it. But at least I think what he has done in Bahubali, for example, is he has tried to be true to whatever that era is. And he's called it a fictional era. He's not even said that this is this age or that period in history. But he's at least tried to be true to that world he's created. You have to do that. This is what we all have to do as writers, as filmmakers, as television show producers. You have to be true to the story you're telling. It doesn't even matter if you have created it or any writer has created it, but once you have created it, you have to follow through. And that's what I think we lack in India. We do not follow through. We are not sincere and honest in the period setting or in the detailing or in the scripting or the acting of these shows.
Right. Ashok, when if one compares the way in India in recent times we have treated this, art of storytelling, to television and cinema, and if you look westwards, for example, one could argue that Avatar was in many ways a sort of a mytho fantasy creation, right? I mean,
Right?
when I saw Avatar, I could identify a lot of things to say that, maybe a lot of this has been taken from our own Indian mythology. The color of the characters, the fact that there's this supernatural bonding with amongst themselves, with the tree, with flying animals, so on and so forth. Do you see that clearly the West has been able to take the mythological narrative maybe a level ahead, given the fact that they didn't inherit it and we inherited so much more compared to them, and they've been able to take it, to a new level.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Kumar. There's no question about that. And that's exactly what I've been seeing since I was a kid. I don't know why other Indians, probably many Indians have, but I've not met many Indians in those years, in the 70s and 80s, who seemed aware of it as I was. it seemed so obvious to me when I saw the influences. And I think the reason is, excuse me, I mean, the Beatles were one of the first people to discover yoga and meditation over here. It took the Beatles, for Christ's sake. I mean, think about it, right? It took people, Westerners, I mean, let's face it, the whole cult of Krishna, the belief of Krishna as a divinity, or even beyond religion. I'm just saying that the whole respect for our yoga, our meditative techniques, TM, our learning, our lore, our Ayurveda, or our basmati rice, or our mangoes, where has all the greatest interest and development come? Abroad, internationally. Where are the centers of learning of Sanskrit outside India? Obviously outside India, are in Europe. And the reason for this is that they have always understood and admired and been awed by our culture and our whole heritage. Not that we don't, but they have somehow realized that they want to do something with it. These same stories that we are talking about today, that I'm trying to tell in India, and people like Rajamouli and so many other directors. I have a project coming up with Disney, which is a retelling of the Mahabharata with Abhishek Kapoor is going to direct. That's going to go on the floors next year. So, for example, we are trying to do this, but they are far ahead of us. Today, we have to say things like Game of Thrones, like Lord of the Rings. It should be the other way around.
Exactly.
Right. I was at a launch of my Prince of Ayodhya back in 2003. At that point, someone was asking me a question like, don't you think you've ripped off the Lord of the Rings? I said, well, I wish I had, because then I would be a much richer man. Apart from that, but let's not forget, Lord of the Rings is based on an ancient European myth called Lord of the Rings. That was not created by Tolkien. The myth of the rings of power, the myth of the various kings and their ghostly servants who go out and do their bidding, the evil eye, all this came from European mythology. All Tolkien was doing was finding a way to retell it for his period, which is the 20s and 30s and 40s in England. The fact that it became a film today has more to do with Hollywood catching up late, but catching up in a big way. So, incidentally, by the time I was writing my Ramayana series, the Lord of the Rings films hadn't gone into production. So when they were shooting the first Lord of the Rings film, the people at New Line Cinema were actually reading the manuscript of Prince of Ayodhya, and I was in touch with them by email. So I felt so happy when the first Lord of the Rings film came out, which was just after my Prince of Ayodhya, by the way. In America, I'm saying, not in India, because it was first published in America. I was so happy because I felt these people who were making this film were reading my work and admiring it, but they were admiring my work and other Indian, much greater works than mine, obviously, because they said that all these epics, all these mythologies of the West, ultimately their mother, lord, the mother river of all these stories is India. That's what they were saying. And I felt so awed by that. And I said, they realize it. Why don't we? Why aren't they saying we need to make films like Mahabharata? We need to tell stories like the Ramayana. So
Right.
they realized this a lot, much before us, Kumar. And I think what they've done very successfully is realize that if the Indians can't do it, well, we can. We have the resources. We have the visual effects, and we'll figure it out. James Cameron has always figured out how to do the visual effects after he's written the script. He
Right.
writes the script first and then tries to do it. And I think that's what we lack. We lack the ambition and the chutzpah to say, we have the greatest stories of the world. Now let's make the greatest films. Let's make the greatest TV shows. Let's write books that will sell around the world and show people these are our stories. Let's claim our heritage.
True. True. Ashok, we're almost at the end of this session. It's been really exciting. I'm seeing some questions for you on Twitter. I'm just going to take one since we don't have much time.
Okay.
It's going to show up on your screen, and then you can respond to it.
Okay.
So the question from the lady is, the success of your books shows there is a market for it. When did you first realize it?
Okay. I'll just respond to it. Okay, on video, right. So hi, Bani, and thanks for your question. And it's a good question, but unfortunately, when I started writing, there was no market for my books. And this is back in the late 90s, by the way, which is when I was writing my Ramayana series and, in fact, portions of my Mahabharata. And I was told that nobody wanted to read mythology, and especially nobody wanted to read mythology published in English. So all the sales, all the flowering of the genre that's happening now came almost 15, 20 years later. So at the time when I was writing, when I finished my entire Ramayana series by 2004, there was no market for it. I'd like to believe that the publication of my Ramayana series perhaps in some way helped create the market. That's what people like Amish came to me in 2010. That's what he said. He said he had read my Prince of Ayodhya and it sparked something in him. And I was very happy, but I had no idea even then that even Amish's book would go on to be such a huge bestseller. So this is something that has happened after the fact. Today, I'm very happy to see it, but I'm sorry to say that I had nothing to do with it consciously. It just happened.
Great. Okay, Ashok, thank you so much for your candid comments and some very interesting insights into the world of mythology and what we can expect to see going forward. All we can wish for you is more power to your pen, and may you keep showing the world India's rich heritage through your art of storytelling.
Thank you, Kumar, and thank you for doing LitFestX. It's a great experience and a great idea. Please continue doing it.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.